Hello, my name is Emily, and in this lesson, I will be going over Lesson 4, Advanced JavaScript, and we'll be discussing buttons. A quick overview of what we'll be going over today is we'll be discussing what are buttons, we'll be creating functions for buttons, and we'll be using if statements with buttons. So first, let's do some review questions. So feel free to go ahead and pause the video, think about the answers, and then resume the video when you are ready to hear the answer. So first, how do we access data from an object? We can access data from an object by using dot notation. Alternatively, you can also use bracket notation. Next, how do we create a new property? We can create a new property by saying object name, the property name is equal to new value. If the property already exists, then it will just change the value. Next, what is object-oriented programming used for? Object-oriented programming is used as a template to create new objects. Next, how do you call a function? You call a function by saying function name and then passing in any parameters. Today, we will be adding a button to purchase items. So in the previous lesson, we used objects to add items to the store, but we couldn't really purchase them unless we ran a function from our code. So now we're going to be adding buttons that allow the user to purchase the upgrades. So over here, as you can see, you can click on the cookie, and then when you have enough money, you can purchase upgrades. So here I purchased an upgrades for cookie per click, and then if I keep going until I have 100 cookies, I can purchase the cookies per second upgrade. So first, what is a button? So a button is an object that we'll be creating using the object template, and they're used for clicking to complete an action. You can see them being used in websites, games, and more. So creating buttons. So for the button object, the syntax will be var button name the syntax for the constructor will be var button name is equal to function, then you put your x, y, width, and height. So over here, you're going to set the properties, and then when you're creating new buttons, you will be passing in the different values for where you want it to be. So this is an example of how you could use it. So now I want you to go ahead and create a button template with x, y, width, height, and label, and then use it to make a button object. You don't need to draw the button right now, just make the template. So go ahead, pause the video, work on this, and then resume the video when you are done. So now let's quickly go over the answer key. So for the button object, right now what you want to have is you want to have your XY width height label over here. You're going to be passing that in, and then you want to just go ahead, you want to make sure that you're setting these property values. Now we're going to go over functions with buttons. So we can add functions just as easily as any other property to templates like the button template. So two useful functions are a draw function, which will actually draw your button, and an is mouse inside function, which checks if the mouse is touching your button. To call these functions after you create an object, use object name dot function name and make sure you're adding the parentheses. The properties of each individual objects are accessed with this dot property. So over here, for example, this is the general template. So you have this dot function name is equal to function, and if you want to specifically do a draw function, you could name it draw, and then you can set it to these values. So you want to make sure that you're using the x, y, width, and height that you're declaring, and you also want to make sure that you're putting your label there so that the user knows what they're buying. To change the text, you can use text size and text align. So now I want you to go ahead and add a draw function to your button template that draws your button, then call your function. Remember to use this dot property. So go ahead, pause the video, work on this, and resume the video when you are done. Now I want you to go ahead and add a is mouse inside function. So this function should check if the mouse is inside or touching your button. So create a function, use this dot property and if statements, and use mouse X and mouse Y to get the position of the mouse. This function should return true or false. So pause the video, work on this, and resume the video when you are done. Now I will be going over the answer key. So over here, this is an example. So they have the draw function, they're drawing their rectangle here. They're making sure they use their X, Y, width, and height. And then they're setting the text. You want to make sure you're changing the color because if it matches the background, it's not going to show up. And then over here, they're putting their label and they're moving the X and Y a bit, but they're still making sure that they're using the properties they set. Then they have a isMouseInside function, which checks if the mouse X and mouse Y are within the parameters of the button, if they're inside of it, and if it is, they return true, otherwise they return false. So now we'll be going over if statements with buttons. So for mouse clicked, the general mouse click notation is that you have var mouse clicked is equal to function and you put whatever code you want inside of the curly braces. If you want to check if certain conditions are true and only do things after that is true, you can go ahead and use if statements. So in this case, we want to check if the mouse is inside of the buttons, and the way you can do that is by using the isMouseInside function of both of your buttons. So you can check those using if statements, and if that's true, you want to go ahead and purchase whatever that store item is. So the step 4 is to create buttons to purchase items. So create an instance button for every store item you have. So you have you should have at least 2 store items. So one for cookies per click, one for cookies per second. So that means you should be making at least 2 instance buttons, and then draw each of these buttons with button.draw inside of the draw function. That makes sure that it is on the screen. Then use if statements inside of the mouse click function to check which button is clicked and purchase the relevant item when the button is clicked. So pause the video, work on this, and resume the video when you're done. Make sure that you're calling the function you created in step 3 inside the mouse click function to check which button has been clicked. And make sure you are using if statements. Also, make sure that you call the store items purchase function inside the if statement. So now I will be going over the answer key. So first, you want to make sure that when you go down to your draw function, you want to make sure that you're actually drawing the buttons so that they show up on the screen, because if they're not there, the user might not know where to press it. Then inside the mouse click function, you want to check if the mouse is inside of either of these buttons, and then if it is, you want to go ahead and purchase the function that matches this. So the clicker button, I'm going to go ahead and purchase a clicker item, and then the grandma button, I'm going to purchase a grandma item. Now you want to go ahead and save your project, so press that blue button in the corner. It should be gray after you've saved it, and then we will go on to recap questions. So now some recap questions. First, what does mouse click do? Mouse clicked will check if the mouse has been clicked, and under it you can go ahead and use several if statements to check if other conditions are true before you do something else. Next, what do buttons do? Give an example. So think about that, and then I will give an example. Yeah, so buttons allow you to press something and then do an action as a result. So in our case, we want to press one of the buttons and buy a store item. So it's kind of like a cause and effect result. So that is it for lesson 4. Thank you for listening.